The following sequence can be seen as a type of lung cleaning routine, essentially working from the inside out. So there are various aspects of it that we'll focus on individually, but essentially we are stretching the lungs from the inside, both passively, filling it with air and using various positions and physical manipulations to stretch the lungs, and also working with contractions by breathing out as much as possible, which essentially takes us to the other end of the range for breathing. So maximally expanded and then maximally contracted. The first important tool that we need to look at is quite simply the wave breath. The wave breath. And we use this wave breath essentially to center ourselves and to feel ourselves at a type of standing 0 point for when we want to start or move on to another phase of this breathing sequence. We'll start with soft knees and soft hips, feeling yourself grounded, and also the feeling that a hot air balloon pulls you upwards at the same time. So I'm neither too slumped nor too upright, but rather I'm hanging suspended in this middle world. I feel that my axis goes right down through my body and comes somewhere between the middle of the feet here and likewise between the middle of the feet in the frontal plane. Soft knees, soft hips. The breath is going to almost come from the heels as I breathe, and I instigate a very small down-up spinal wave. So what this means is the wave actually goes from the feet to the knees pull the pelvis under, and it ripples to the head top. At the same time as I do this, however, this wave, it's combined with a breath which starts from the diaphragm, then lifts upwards higher. It will look like this. And that was the in-breath. Now you can place one hand on your stomach and one hand on your chest and feel that when you instigate the wave, the breath comes to the stomach first, and then it waves into the chest area afterwards. And that would be the in-breath. Now, we would hold this in-breath just for a moment with the air very high up in the lung cavity, but making sure that we're not holding very tense. We actually feel ourselves very movable, even though I'm holding the breath in the chest. And then afterwards, we release the breath. Now this is very important to understand, that it is not an active out breath after I've performed the in wave breath. I essentially just release, and it brings me to a 0 point diaphragmatic breathing position in which I feel myself once again grounded. So this wave breath essentially releases tension and grounds me afterwards. So it would look like this. Soft knees, soft hips. Hold. Relaxed. 0 point. So 0 point means that I'm neither breathe out and tense, and nor am I breathing in and holding tension in the diaphragm. So, see that from the front, wave breath down, up. Zero point. So, misinterpretation would be, I've now come to a minus diaphragmatic position. We just want to relax to a 0 point. Grounded, 0 point. just to add one thing to this wave breath, ultimately we don't always want to have to use the hands as a reference. You can do so, but ultimately it should just be zero. Lastly, with the wave breath, which is the first part of the sequence, is that it also does not have to be a huge wave. In fact, it's quite nice if we can still feel this wave working within our system, but even at the most micro level. So for example, this was also a wave breath. And then on the larger end of the spectrum, wave breath. So you can use the wave breath that you feel is appropriate for you at that time. If you do really feel like, oh yeah, let it all out, and drop it down, absolutely fine. But that is essentially the spectrum that we are looking for. It's not, for example, that's a wave breath done exactly like this, but a small wave isn't, and it works on a spectrum. So that would be the first step. The second breath that we need to take a look at is the reverse breath. And the reverse breath is quite simply a breath in which I breathe inwards, and instead of what is often determined as the optimal breath, which is diaphragmatic breathing, no, we're actually going to pull the stomach in as we breathe, hence it's a type of reversed breath, because a normal breath would be from here, but we use a reverse breath, which means when we breathe in, I pull the stomach in. Now what happens here is that when I contract the diaphragmatic cavity, it sends the air up into the lungs, which is exactly where I want it for this particular drill. So I'm going to reverse breath and fill the lungs, feel the rib cage expand outwards and upwards, and even pulling it up with some clavicular as much as possible, filling the lung cavity with air so that I can use it to stretch the lungs essentially from the inside out. Now again, it's important to remember that when I fill the air with lungs, I'm not holding with excessive tension. So for example, the wave breath would look like this. I don't want to hold like this. I'm holding relaxed. Feel that you can move the neck. And again. And this can actually be a beginner's sequence. Quite simply, these two movements, and you would just hold the reverse breath until you experience a mild air hunger. So what does it mean, a mild air hunger? Well, normally it basically means you feel you need to breathe. That's it. As soon as you feel a small amount that you need to breathe, just release it. It should not be a maximal breath hold or anything like this. It would just be until you feel a slight need to breathe. So for example, just these two movements in sequence as a breathing practice for lung cleaning, lung opening, would be wave breath, grounded, reverse breath, move, let yourself move, and you'll feel stretching in different parts of the lungs. Passive out breath. Wave breath. And you could either repeat that sequence, say, 3 times, 3 to 5 times. It will take you quite literally a couple of minutes. And that would be absolutely fine for a beginner sequence. Just note that the wave breath there, it's placed again at the end, so of course you could perform another reverse breath afterwards, but I do encourage you to always finish with the wave breath, because when we're holding our breath, as much as we're trying to be relaxed, there is certain tension in the body from this deep inhalation that we reset our system with the wave breath. So any residual tension that I was holding after the passive out, wave breath, kind of helps reset my system afterwards. We're going to take the reverse breath a step further, more into the perspective of lung cleaning. Now, we'll work lung cleaning by now exploring different types of directions, bending, and also tapping on the sides using the fingertips, and then later, in later progressions, also using the hands if necessary. So I would take a reverse breath after my wave breath, so reverse breath. And you can't see my feet, but when I do the reverse breath, I'm soft knees, soft hips. I can feel that I can move the feet. I'm not completely stuck with the feet here. If the feet are moving, then you can ensure that the rest of the body will be nice and movable as well. If the feet are very firmly stuck, yes, I can move, but it still has this quite rigid base, and we want to feel very, very soft and flowy, as if we are being breathed throughout this sequence. Soft feet, soft knees, soft hips, wave breath. Reverse breath. Now, relaxed, I tap from the sternum outwards and I head down. Keep moving. So again, that would essentially be the short sequence just with a wave breath, and then also the reverse breath with some added cleaning stimulation from the fingertips. Now, if you find that you're very relaxed holding the reverse breath, and you can hold it for quite some time, we did only tapping from the sternum outwards. What we could also do is flexion to the side, then focus on one side here, flexion to the other side, focusing on the other side here. So it would look like this. Wave breath. Reverse breath. Hold, relaxed, clean from sternum out. Flexion. Flexion. Passive out. Reverse breath. Sorry, wave breath. And you can repeat this sequence. And lastly, the only thing to add to the physical touching, cleaning aspect is you can also work with the hands. And this would be a bit more of an intense slapping on the body, so you might want to wear a t-shirt or something. I would personally, however, encourage you just to work for some weeks or even some months just with the in to out tapping, just so you understand how this feels, and then adding the side flexion, again, just to note how the differences feel and anything else, because this is very, very fine work. and then perhaps after maybe 4 to 6 months of practice, then add the slapping. And it's not from a perspective that, you know, it's progressive and you have to build up to it. No, not at all. It's just the case that if you just throw everything in straight away, if I were to create a delicious dish for you and throw all the best spices in there, yes, it would taste delicious, but would you learn to distinguish between the different spices? If I said to you, what spice can you taste here, what spice can you taste there? The likelihood is you would not be able to tell me because you don't have experience with those individual pieces, which in themselves are very delicious or very, very powerful. So I do encourage you not just to throw everything in at the same time, and that goes for this entire breathing sequence as we move onward and keep adding, because it will give you more of a sensitivity to the potential effects and sensations that you experience with this sequence if you do give those individual pieces the attention that they should deserve. So lastly, I'll show you how it would look with the slapping, and I'll give you even a few options for that as well. So let's go through the sequence now with the slapping. Wave breath. Relax, grounded. Reverse breath. I start finger tapping in, out, side flexion, and then if I have the breath still, open, open, wave breath. Grounded. So I went with like 5 slaps there. You can even go with 3. I would just say cover the whole side of the rib cage, keeping the hand quite wide. It shouldn't be a surface slap. It's quite a deep slap. So when you fill it with air, you should have that hollow sound. We're really looking for that, that vibration inside the lung cavity. I'm just working from 1 round of slaps. As I said, as you gain in experience, you can add slightly more. So for example, I might do 3 rounds of 5 slaps with slight different tempos. As an example, so just jumping straight, of course, there to the reverse breath with the slapping. The first slaps were a little bit lighter going through, then a bit heavier, and then the heaviest. And this, again, in itself will work perfectly as a sequence in and of itself. Quite simply, the wave breath, reverse breath, and then some lung cleaning. Repeat 3 to 5 times. And this in and of itself is a great sequence. However, we will add to this particular sequence because there are some very simple things that we can do to get a little bit more stretching in different positions and range inside the lung cavity as we're performing this movement, just by adding a few simple things. So the first thing that we'll add before we start adding any torsion or directional aspects to this breathing is introduce the last breath. So we've got the wave breath, we've got the reverse breath, and now we're going to have the emptying breath, the emptying breath. Now the emptying breath can quite simply be seen as an effort to empty all of the air from your lungs. Now, this can be quite a practice in and of itself, because when do we actually ever empty all of the air from our lungs? In many cases, never, ever, unless we're truly screaming to the point, when a very young child or a baby screams and then no more sound comes out, this is the bad time. This kid is either really upset or really hurt themselves. It's the point where they're screaming so much, ah! That was the time when the air had completely left the lungs. So just think, the last time you did that, perhaps the last time that you emptied the air fully from your lungs. One of my teachers will say that we always carry around 20% residual air in our lungs, which is never emptied for perhaps years at a time. So it can carry all types of, whether it's dust particles or it can gather and create infections, this, that, and the third. Essentially, we'll take it from the perspective of, can you empty your lungs, bro? Okay? So the way this will work then is that we will facilitate the emptying of the lungs with simultaneous flexion of the torso, or front fold, so that we can quite literally squeeze all of the air out of there. So this is where it would fit in the sequence. I would perform the wave breath, grounded, reverse breath, clean. I release to 0 point, grounded, and from the 0 point, I then begin to expel the air gradually from my lungs. So after the lung cleaning, it would look like this. I clean my lungs, 0 point, now. So as you can hear at the end there, perhaps I gave it quite a nice hack at the end. And again, this is the perspective of emptying and creating as much tension as possible. You'll see it in certain forms of Japanese martial arts and other as well, in which, the kia. So it's it creates the utmost tension in the body. But we also use it in this context to ensure that all air is emptied from the lungs. So don't be afraid to really give it that or even cough it all out at the end. We are really speaking about cleaning all of that air from the lungs. Now, after we've emptied, we are at true -1, which means all air is emptied from the lungs. Now, when I return to standing, as I stand, as I extend, I'm going to let the air pass passively into my body to bring me back to a 0 point again, diaphragmatic 0, when I'm standing. Now this takes much practice to itself, and you can even practice this as a separate movement, maybe 3 times. If you're just performing the wave breath, then the cleaning, then you can practice this 3 times afterwards, just separately to itself. Because what can happen, and what normally happens, is I empty, and then when I stand, I go, this is not diaphragmatic 0, this is a +1, or around that area, because I actively breathe in. It is not an active in-breath, it's a passive in-breath, caused by 2 things. Of course, I'm maximally breathing out, so that when I release, the diaphragm drops and it automatically, passively starts to suck air in. And the other aspect is, of course, because I'm standing, it's also expanding my rib cage, expanding the breathing organs here, and then, of course, letting the air flow through. So it will take some practice. Just to repeat that again, I've done my wave breath, I did my cleaning, 0 point, straight from the 0 point, don't take a breath in, so cleaning, 0, direct, zero. It's not out, it's not in, it's at 0 point. Now, we have all the pieces to make a beginner sequence, which would be wave breath, reverse breath, cleaning, passive out, wave breath to reset, and that would be the beginner sequence. Now, from this beginner sequence, this is now the fundamental base of the breathing practice. We're going to start adding to this beginner sequence. However, as mentioned before, I encourage you to stay with that beginner sequence for some months of practice before you start adding. We will now add breath holding. And this would be the first step after moving on from the beginner sequence, because it's very, very easy implemented. And it's easily implemented because it comes quite simply at the end after your air expelling breath. Once you've expelled all the air, your emptying breath, when you bring yourself back up to 0 point, you do a 0 point breath hold at this place. Again, until mild air hunger, until you feel a slight need to breathe. So just to show you where that's placed, we start with wave breath, reverse, cleaning, wave breath again, to reset, breathe out, empty, passive in. Now I hold at 0 point. Relax, feel that you can move, and when you feel slight air hunger, you start very light, normal breathing. Now, mild air hunger means that really you should recover normally and feel yourself normal breathing within 2 to 3 breaths. If after you start breathing again, you have to go and take a deep breath or sigh, this is completely counterproductive to the practice. You might as well have not done the 0 point breath hold, because what we are training is carbon dioxide tolerance, and all that you're doing is, if you take a big breath and a big breath out, is flushing out all the carbon dioxide that we're trying to practice with. So really this perspective of just holding as long as possible really needs to go out the window in this type of breath work. Now, we can add to this breath hold further by also, after time, practicing a -1 breath hold instead of a 0-point breath hold. So notice all we're doing now is we're just complexifying the breath hold aspect. Everything that comes before remains the same. So wave breath, grounded, reverse breath, cleaning, grounded, wave breath to reset, grounded, emptying. Now, when I empty, I do not let the air in. There is no passive in-breath when I come up. I hold the -0, and this is where I perform my breath hold. So now, hold. So I now have 2 breath holds. I had a breath hold at -1, where I was holding, and this you can perhaps only do for a few seconds. If it's too intense, just leave it. Just work with the 0-point breath hold. But from here, I had the -1, and then I released. It was not an active in-breath. No, a release. 0, and then afterwards I also held at 0. So that would be wave breath, grounded, reverse breath, cleaning, grounded, wave breath, grounded, expelling breath, -1 breath hold, 0-point breath hold, normal breathing. And that would be 1 round of your beginner sequence with added breath holds. And again, 2, 3 rounds, absolutely fine. One way you can start to make the breath holds measurable, if this is your game, I would count the 0-point breath holds, not the -1 breath hold. The -1 breath hold is more of an added stress stimulus. But the 0-point breath hold, start with 5 seconds. Second round, go for 10 seconds. Third round, go for 15 seconds. And work with this incremental increase as you develop in your practice. So in the future, the first maybe 10, then 15, then 20, then 15, 20, 30. Then from 20, 30, and then 40 seconds 0-point breath hold. When you have developed experience to come to that point, where again, you should afterwards be able to regain normal breathing within 3 breaths. And it will take quite some years of practice to come to that point. But I should not find myself afterwards, because then again, this completely negates the 0-point breath work perspective and the underlying biochemistry of it. So, that is bringing us towards an intermediate version of this sequence, adding the breath holds. The last thing we will now add is quite simply working with directions. Now, it's important to note that whenever I turn my torso in this sequence, and the sequence remains exactly the same, but the reason I'm turning is because I want to create a type of torsion in the rib cage, in the breathing cavity, sorry, in the lung cavity, in the abdominal cavity. I want to create a desirable torsion, which means my knees and my pelvis, as much as possible, should stay in the forward direction, so that when I turn, it turns from the torso. Yeah, there is some turning in the pelvis, but I'm deliberately trying to create torsion. We do not want this, because now I feel like I'm breathing in a different direction, but actually I'm not. I'm still breathing sagittally, in the sagittal plane, which is where we always breathe, which is where we always work. Okay, so what we're trying to encourage here now is breathing with torsion in this place, which means you will find yourself breathing and stretching and inflating and expelling in places and regions of the lung and the breathing cavities that you have perhaps never ever done before, or not for very, very, very much time. Perhaps, for example, if you're familiar with concepts from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you have a person lying on top of you and you're perhaps in a strange position and you have to breathe, this might be something towards the practice that we're experiencing here, but of course on a much more controlled and much less stressed level perhaps. So, the directions, we've already worked with the forward direction. We now have 4 other directions. We have diagonal right, diagonal left, we have right, and we have left. So, it means that this breathing sequence can be performed once in this direction, straight forward, and then you turn slightly. You perform it again in this direction, diagonal left. Then you perform it facing diagonal right. Then you perform it facing complete left. Then you have it facing complete right. 90 degrees. So it's like 90, 90, 45, 45, straight forward. Now, if time is an issue and if you just have 5 minutes, you just want to get something done quickly, you can perform this entire breathing sequence. I would encourage you forward and then 90 left and then 90 right. This will give you the most experience of torsion and then you'll get it done in just a few minutes. If you do have the extra 8 or 10 minutes though, I do encourage you to work with the diagonals at 45 as well. Now, one thing that I will add, other than the directions, this is quite self-explanatory and I'll demonstrate in a moment, is that when we are performing the expelling of the breath, we can do it not just once, not just twice, but 3 or even 5 times, and only on the last do you fully expel, give it the kia and hold, and then turn that into your breath hold. This is an option which is available if you want to expand this breath practice out to around 10, 15, even 20 minutes. And I'll show you how that would look, also working with one of the directions. So I perform the breath work here. Now I'm going to turn diagonal right, wave breath. Grounded, reverse. Cleaning. Wave breath. Grounded. Breathe in. Normal breathing. As you can see, instead of from the 0 point, breathing straight out, I really inflated the lungs, almost like a reversed breath. I filled the lungs, I breathed out forcefully as much as possible, 3 times, 4 times, and on the 3rd or the 5th time, that would be the full expelling, emptying breath. Holding at -1 if this is appropriate for you, or just coming back to that 0 point, which you would do so in any case after the -1 and work with the breath hold there. So, before going through the whole sequence with you, I'm going to give you one last option, and this should really be reserved for, I hate to say advanced, but much more experienced breath work, because it's going to be working with a vacuum hold, an active vacuum hold. Now, I encourage you not just to throw this into the sequence if you have not spent much practice time with it already. If you're not sure how to perform a vacuum hold, I encourage you to look on the website at the Elements programming and check out even just a basic practice there. This will give you experience with not just, okay, I'll do my vacuum hold, but progressive movements towards that, working with vacuum sucking, work with 0-point breath holding, and then eventually moving on to and developing vacuum. But I provide it here just in case some of you already have experience with the vacuum, just to show you where I personally place it. And quite simply, I place the vacuum hold just as if I'm holding the -1 after the emptying breath, and I'm at -1. You can throw in the vacuum hold there, and then release, and then hold at 0 point. So it would look like this. I perform my last emptying breath. Normal breathing. This is a very, very powerful, but very, very stressful combination. And this vacuum hold followed by a 0-point breath hold. If you try this, and as I said, please only do so with experience. If you try this, you will find that when you release your vacuum, and you try to hold at 0 point, the blood rushes to your head, you'll feel like your head's going to explode and your body is begging you to breathe. This is the case, so it is of course quite a stress on the system. If you have experience, however, and you can calm yourself in this scenario, what you'll find is that extreme stress only lasts for about 5 or 10 seconds. By the time you get normally past the 8 or 10 seconds from the 0-point breath hold, quite an incredible sensation of relaxation overcomes the system as the parasympathetic starts to kick back in, and you'll find yourself perhaps even being able to hold the 0-point breath hold for longer. For me, it's just an interesting phenomenon. Just to add to this as well, one last thing. As well as working with the vacuuming, you can also turn that vacuum into diaphragm-sucking. Again, if you do not have experience with this, practice it separately and have a method. I really encourage you to take on the breathing and diaphragm basic practice, or if you're more interested, the full elements package for that. However, if we start working with diaphragm-sucking, we really start to implement this aspect of abdominal cavity mobilization here. Moving yourself, getting a lot of really great, really valuable movement around the digestive system. You may find yourself running to the toilet either during or straight after the sequence, and this actually goes for the entire sequence in itself. It really will get the gastrointestinal tract and everything doing its job and squeezing things along. Just to let you know how that vacuum sucking would look. So, of course, after the wave breath, breathing out. your breathing. I did 3 or 5 sucks there. One thing I will encourage is that if you're working with diaphragm sucking is prioritize maximal range over number of how many times you can work it. And the reason is because working with more, this will get more effect to the digestive system. However, this sequence in general is really concerning itself with working the maximal range of expansion and of contraction of your breathing organs. And by really sucking in tightly as high as you can, you're getting quite a nice type of passive stretch for the whole diaphragm. So I really encourage you to do them a bit slower and just suck them right in. So for example, this would be preferable to that. And also when you're working with those really deep vacuum holds, explore, for example, holding on the thighs, rising the rib cage, opening out, trying to feel if you can bring that diaphragm deeper into more of a concave stretch. Okay, so those are all the technicalities, so to speak, and all the additions for the breathing sequence. I'm now going to perform the entire sequence working in the different directions. So total we have 5 directions: forward, diagonal left, diagonal right, 90 left, 90 right. And I'm going to be working with 3 expelling breaths, and I'm going to be working only with a 0-point breath hold. So if you're someone who wants to work with, for example, the diaphragmatic -1 or the vacuum holds, then you can just add this in as your practice develops. But this is basically a very nice beginner place where I think it would be great for everyone to build up to, and working here and keeping the sequence just as it is for years. It can serve you for years practicing this every morning. And it's very, very practical, it's very, very quick, and this is absolutely fine to work with this sequence. As I said, the diaphragmatic minus or the vacuuming, for example, this can be something absolutely additional, it's not necessary. So without further ado, let's go through the sequence. Movable in the feet, soft in knees, soft in hips, pulled up by the hot air balloon, but grounded, suspended in the middle world. Wave breath from the floor to the head top, filling the diaphragm and then the chest cavity. Forty-five, knees to the front, pelvis to the front, repeat. Diagonal left. Reset. Reverse breath. Reverse, so wave, expel. Knees to the front. Ninety left. Normal breathing. Good. You don't have to increase it by 5 seconds every time. If you get, for example, to 10 seconds and you find, yeah, this is a good, mild or medium air hunger for me, just stick with those 10 seconds for each round, each direction, and then slowly increase it over time. One very, very significantly important thing to mention about this entire sequence is that it is very, very advisable to perform it entirely in front of an open window with fresh air, or outside in fresh air. So for example, I normally perform it here with my window open. I'm not sure if you can see, but I have my window here and I breathe out of this window every single morning. Because of course, not only are we emptying and expanding and contracting the air cavities, we are also replacing this perhaps old stagnant air that has been there for much time. So we want to replace it with fresh air. So this cannot be stressed enough. Please do perform this in front of an open window with fresh air. So, other than that, this breathing drill can be practiced every single morning. I personally perform it every single morning in one form or another. The full variation, so to speak, for me would be then working, of course, with the vacuuming points, working with 5 breaths on each side, working with a bit more of the slapping and really bulking it out. But it can be just as simple as working 3 directions with only 1 maximally emptying breath and not working with the vacuuming as well. For example, if you do also perform the manual mobilization for the abdominal cavity and the ribs, as you'll also find on the open resources, this already has a significant amount of abdominal manipulation, so perhaps you then don't need the vacuuming afterwards unless you want to have an active aspect to it. So for example, I'm pulling it in, I'm moving rather than being moved. And one last thing I'd like to mention is that I've given here a lot of information, and I really encourage you, if you're new to this practice, to really do start with the beginning and spend at least 4 to 6 weeks just with one sequence that you build yourself. So by build yourself, I mean starting from that very initial instance, just with the forward direction, maybe just forward, right, left, only working with the wave breath and also working with the cleaning. And then perhaps a wave breath and then the cleaning, and then add the expelling as well. And then maybe 6 months, 8 months later, then perhaps add the breath holding. But as I said, altogether this is a very delicious dish for your breathing organs, but can you know, understand and feel the nuances between the different aspects? If you throw everything right in at the beginning, you will not be able to, and you will not be able to really dig into all the finer aspects of this very, very powerful sequence.